man in his mid-30s standing in the doorway of a forest. Shelter structure, daylight. Wife visible in background at campsite, his hand on the door frame, his eyes checking the hasp, looking for external locks, looking for the bracket. His wife not watching, unpacking gear, relaxed. He does this alone, every time. Every structure, without explaining why, shot from slightly outside, his profile visible. Hand on frame, eyes doing the check. The habit that is fear with better posture. Photorealistic intimate final shot. Color palette. Warm daylight plus forest green plus his face half in shadow doing the check. I was out of the storm. That was enough. I sat on the floor with my back against the bench and listened to the rain on the roof and started to come down from the adrenaline of the last hour. Outside, lightning was throwing brief white light through the window at irregular intervals. I counted seconds between flash and thunder. 3 miles, 2 miles. Getting closer. It was when the storm directly overhead that I started actually looking at the room. I noticed the bench I was leaning against first. It was bolted to the wall, not unusual in a field station. But the bolts were on the outside of the bench, driven from the wall side, so that the bench couldn't be moved away from the wall without tools. I stood up and looked at it. Heavy gauge bolts. Recent relative to the rest of the structure, the metal was less corroded. I looked at the door I'd come in through. The hasp where the padlock had been was on the outside, standard enough for a storage building. But there was a second bracket lower on the frame, also on the outside, this one intact, with a newer padlock hanging open through it. I hadn't noticed it when I came in because I'd pushed straight through. 2 external locks, no internal latch of any kind. My eyes went to the window. The glass was intact, surprising for an abandoned structure. I walked over and looked at the frame. 4 screws, 1 at each corner, driven in from the outside, their heads flush with the exterior sill. The window could not be opened from inside. Around the interior of the window frame, at fingertip height, the wood was marked. Not randomly, the marks ran horizontally, repeatedly, in the same places. The paint had been worn completely away in those spots, and the bare wood beneath was scratched deep. Someone had tried to open that window from inside for a very long time. I stepped back and looked at the room differently. The bolted bench, the 2 external locks, the screwed shut window, the scratches. This room had been used to hold someone. I should have left. I know that. But the storm outside was directly overhead at that point. Lightning every 40 seconds. The thunder now simultaneous with the flash. And I had no shelter within practical distance. Whatever had happened in this room was old. The scratches were old. The chemical smell I'd noticed when I came in was just the smell of old institutional cleaning product, the kind Park Services used everywhere. I sat back down and waited. I don't know how much time passed before I heard the sound at the window. It started soft, a rhythmic scraping, like a branch against the glass. There were no branches near the window. I'd looked at the exterior when I approached, and the nearest tree was 4 meters back. I told myself the storm had bent something into contact with the building, and I almost believed it. Then the scraping stopped, and was replaced by 2 deliberate knocks on the wall beside the window. Not a branch, not wind. I didn't move. I was sitting with my back against the bench facing the door, and I held that position and breathed, and thought about the external locks and the screwed shut window and the scratched wood. And I thought about the coil of rope on the shelf and the bench bolted to the wall. The knock came again, patient, deliberate, 3 this time. The storm was loud enough that I couldn't hear anything else. No footsteps, no voice. Just those 3 knocks, and then silence, and then the rain. I reached into my pack slowly and got my hand around the rifle. Then I smelled smoke. The smoke wasn't coming from outside. It was seeping through the gap at the bottom of the swollen rear door. The one I'd assumed was just stuck in its frame. Thin and white at first, then thickening, and with it a smell that was not wood fire. It was chemical, synthetic. Something had been treated with an accelerant and was burning fast. I had maybe seconds. I hit the front door at a run, and it didn't give. The second external lock, the one I'd registered as hanging open when I came in, had been closed while I was inside. While the storm covered any sound of movement outside, someone had come onto the porch and locked me in. I hit the door again, shoulder first, full weight. The frame was old. The second impact tore the hasp bracket partially out of the wood, and the third broke it free entirely. And I was through it and off the porch and into the rain and running before I'd fully processed that I was free. The rain hit me like a physical reset. I ran without direction, away from the structure, into the trees, and I could hear behind me the specific, crackling acceleration of a fire that has found its fuel and committed. I didn't look back. I put 30 meters between me and the station before something hit me from the left side and I was down. Not a branch, a person. He came in low and fast and got his weight across my back before I could roll. I still had the rifle but not the angle to use it. And he knew that. He was going for my throat. One forearm driving upward under my jaw while the other hand grabbed for the barrel. I tucked my chin hard and took the forearm across my cheekbone instead. Saw white, got my left knee under me and drove upward. He was strong. He didn't speak. That was the worst part. No words, no demands. Just methodical and silent application of force. I got my elbow into his ribs twice before he lost his grip on the rifle barrel. And then I had the angle and I didn't fire it. I swung it and made contact with something and he made the first sound I'd heard from him. A short exhaled grunt, and then I was up and running again and he was not following. I ran until I couldn't. When I finally moved, it was because I needed to move or lose the ability to. I was soaked through, my cheekbone had swollen badly, and my left knee was bleeding from the fall. I got to my feet and started walking and didn't stop until I found a service road, and I followed it until I found a gate. And a vehicle eventually came and the woman driving it took one look at me and drove me to a hospital 40 minutes away without asking many questions. I told the police everything. They were professional about it. They went to the site. The structure was a total loss, nothing left. But the stone foundation and the metal roof collapsed into ash. They found no evidence of an accelerant in what remained, which is not the same as saying it wasn't there. They found no second person. The hasp bracket I'd broken off the door frame was in the debris. That at least was something. What I think about most, in the years since, isn't the fire or the fight in the rain. It's the scratches on the window frame. Someone was in that room for long enough to wear the paint entirely off the wood and cut deep into the grain underneath, trying to open a window that had been screwed shut from outside. Whatever happened to that person, whoever they were, I'll never know. And I think about the locks, the bench, the rope. The station had been set up deliberately as a containment space. Not recently. The age of the materials suggested years, possibly longer, which means it had been used that way before. More than once, possibly. Which means whoever set it up knew the backcountry well enough to build infrastructure in a section of forest most people would never reach, and patient enough to wait out the weather for whoever the storm drove through their door. I had walked in voluntarily. The relief of finding shelter in a storm, so complete that I hadn't questioned anything until it was almost too late. That's what I can't stop thinking about. Not the fire, the patience, the planning, the understanding of exactly how a person alone in bad weather makes decisions. Whoever built that room understood that perfectly. I still hike. I go with my wife now, or with friends, and I check every structure. I shelter in for external locks before I close the door. I tell myself it's a habit born of experience, not fear. Some habits, though, are just fear with better posture.